Hola y bienvenidos a este video donde vamos a hablar sobre el examen de escritora de GCSE Spanish. In this video we're going to focus specifically on the higher tier paper. Los retos de esta clase son conocer todas las partes del examen escrito, entender lo que hay que hacer para triunfar en este examen y aprender un acrónimo para recordar el criterio de éxito. The goals of this lesson are to get to know all of the different parts of the written exam, to understand what we have to do, what one has to do to triumph, to succeed in this written exam, and then we're going to learn an acronym which will help you to remember the success criteria, all the boxes that you need to tick to get the best mark that you possibly can. Para empezar, ¿cuáles son las partes del examen? To start off with, let's have a look at what the different parts of the exam are. Now, the higher tier writing exam consists of just 3 sections. The first one is a 90-word question, which is called the crossover question because this is also the final question on the foundation tier paper. So this is the question that you'll do regardless of which tier you end up sitting. And this is based on 4 bullet points and it's worth 16 marks. The second section is a 150-word question based on just 2 bullet points. And that one's worth 32 marks, which is more than half of all the paper. And finally, the third section, you have to translate a passage of text from English into Spanish, and that one's worth 12 marks. All 3 of these sections will be based on content from the GCSE topics, so it could be about family, friends, it could be about holiday, places in town, the environment, volunteering, work, school, but you won't know which topics are going to come up before you sit down and start the exam. So it's important that you revise all of the different topics equally. So let's take a look in detail at section 1, which is the 90 words crossover question. For this, it's important that you answer all aspects of the question, and that means writing about all of the 4 bullet points. Not necessarily equally, so you might write about some more than others, but it's essential that you mention at least something that really ticks the box for each of those 4 bullet points. To ensure that you do this, it's good to first work out what the bullet points mean. Look out for the question words. Is it asking you, what do you do? When do you do something? What do you like? What tense is it asking you to respond in? Is it asking you what you did yesterday, what you did last year, next year? Is it asking you what you normally do? So first look at what the bullet points mean and try and translate them into English if you can, and really highlight the tenses and what they're actually about. You also need to make sure you refer to at least 3 time frames. Now this can just be past, present and future, and it's really good to make sure you explicitly refer to them, so use phrases like ayer, el año pasado, el año que viene, el próximo año, and it's also important that you include a couple of opinions. And it's always good practice to make sure that you give reasons for your opinions as well. So don't just say pienso que las vacaciones en España son interesantes, son fantásticas. Also give a reason, ¿por qué me encanta ir a la playa? So to make this make a bit more sense, we're going to look at an actual exam question. Now this is from a foundation exam paper, so that's why it says 4.1, but this in the higher tier paper would be exactly the same question, it would just be called 1.1. So first, the key thing here is that you get a choice. So think about your options. Before you throw yourself right into 1.1, the first question that comes up, have a look at the second question because they're going to be on 2 different topics, and probably one of those topics you'll feel a bit more confident about. You might know a bit more vocabulary for it. It might be one that you looked at or you revised more recently. So look at your choices first, and then when you've picked a question to answer, think about what the topic is, and this can be part of the choosing process as well. Think about, okay, this is on the theme of free time. I know quite a lot of vocab for free time, and I revised this last week, so I'm going to do this one. Have a look at the register. So this one's asking you to write a blog for a website. So this should make you think about what sort of language you're going to use. You could start off by saying, hello, welcome to my blog, or something like that. You don't have to, but sometimes it might ask you to write a letter to a friend, in which case you might say, hello, I hope you're well, and things like that. So think about the register, and then we'll have a look at the bullet points. Thinking about the tense, ¿qué hiciste? That's the past tense. Si prefieres ir de vacaciones, that's talking about our preferences, so that's present tense. ¿Qué ¿Qué vas a hacer? That's the future tense. What are you going to do? And then we've got, again, talking about our preferences, what we like to do. So that one's going to be the present tense. So that should make us think about, for each of those bullet points, what language do we need to use? What tenses do we need to use in our answer? And we need to make sure we mention all 4 of those. Try and be as explicit, as obvious as you can. What did you do in your holiday last year? Para mis vacaciones el año pasado fui a España. Be as clear as you can that you've seen that bullet point, you've understood it, and you've responded to it as clearly as you possibly could. Because the examiners imagine that they're looking for every reason to give you a lower mark. Don't let them. And it is a 90-word question. You don't need to have spot on 90 words. You won't be penalised if you do a bit less or a bit more. If you do a bit less, it might mean you haven't given quite enough detail, but it's fine if you go over. But everything will be marked. So if you do go over, make sure that it's good stuff, because if not, it might count against you. Now the must-haves for this 90-word question are at least 3 tenses, some opinions and ideally some reasons to justify the opinions, and some extra details like descriptions, time phrases and who with. The reason I tell you to explicitly refer to when things happen, like saying last year or next year, is because if you get the grammar a bit wrong and you don't quite get the tense quite right with the verb, at least the examiner knows what you're trying to say. So if you said, el año pasado voy a ir a España, so last year I'm going to go to Spain, it's a bit confusing, but the examiner can see, okay, you've said last year, so you're probably trying to say I went, so it won't lose you quite as many marks. So it's kind of like it backs you up a bit. And the optional extras you can include to get the highest possible mark are things like other people's opinions. So instead of pienso que, you could say mi amigo piensa que. And some extra tenses. Throwing in something like diría que, I would say that, is a really useful trick because you get a conditional tense in and you're given an opinion at the same time. And you could also put in a conditional like me gustaría ir, I would like to go. So for example, ¿qué hiciste en tus vacaciones el año pasado? What did you do on your holidays last year? You could talk about what you did, and then you could say this year I would like to go to whatever place, and that way you're throwing in an extra tense and really showing off your skills in Spanish. So now let's take a look at how we can respond to the very first bullet point of that exam question. ¿Qué hiciste en tus vacaciones el año pasado? What did you do on your holiday last year? Now a really basic answer would be fui a España. But remember I said the examiner's almost looking for reasons not to give you the mark. They might think, okay, I went to Spain, but was that last year? That could have been 5 years ago. And was it even a holiday? You could have been going there to visit family. So you're better off being really specific and saying el año pasado fui a España. And that's your insurance policy by using el año pasado. If you get the word fui a bit wrong and you write fue or voy a España, then at least you've used the sentence last year, so the examiner gets an idea of what you're trying to say. As long as the message is communicated, you'll get the mark. But you still haven't said on holiday, so we could improve that by saying el año pasado fui a España de vacaciones. That's a good answer to this bullet point, but it's not yet perfect. Who did you do it with? El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia. Extra details. That's going to climb us up the mark scheme. But we still haven't given any opinions yet, so we could throw an opinion in there. El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue divertido. It was fun, fantastic. We've put an opinion in there, but we still need to justify that opinion. Why was it fun? El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido. Okay, so we've improved our opinion a bit more by adding a quantifier, but we still haven't given a reason. El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido porque fuimos a la playa. There it is, we've got what we did, when we did it, who we did it with, what we thought of it, and why we've got that opinion. It was fun because we went to the beach. That would be a really strong answer, but we could still give even more detail to make sure we get a really good mark. So finally, we could say, el año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido porque fuimos a la playa. Me encanta nadar en el mar. I love swimming in the sea. That's another opinion. Me gustaría volver este año I would like to go back this year, that's a conditional tense. Pero mi madre quiere ir a Francia. And there we're talking about what our mother wants to do. So we're showing knowledge of how to use the third person in Spanish as well. So this one would get you a much higher mark than any of the other ones because it has a wider range of language, it has a wider range of tenses and grammar and vocabulary, and it really shows confidence using the Spanish language. Now, to help you remember all the different things you need to do on the success criteria, I've come up with a bit of an acronym. And that acronym is POP-FUDGE. It's maybe not the best or the most memorable, but hopefully it will help you to remember the following things. So it stands for present, opinion, past, future, opinion, justifications. Now, when you're in the exam and you're going through the bullet points and you're translating the different things and you're highlighting what tenses you need to use, you could in the top corner just write POP-FUDGE with a little checkbox next to each letter, and then when you're writing, tick it off as you're going, and then if you get to the end and you have a couple of things you haven't ticked off, you know to quickly add another sentence in and use those things. So the present tense, it's almost impossible not to use the present tense, so that one's one that you'll tick off quite early on. For giving your first opinion, you could use things like en mi opinión or pienso que to be really clear to the examiner that you're giving an opinion. Instead of just saying fue divertido, it was fun, you could say en mi opinión fue divertido. Just to be extra clear, this is an opinion, give me the mark. For the past tense, you only need to use one past, one future, but you could just do present tense and two past tenses, and you'll obviously get a slightly higher mark if you do show that you can use a really good range of tenses. So you could use the preterite tense. For example, if we were talking about listening to music in our free time, we could say ayer escuché música. We could use the perfect tense. Hoy he escuchado música. Today I have listened to music. And we could use the imperfect tense. Cuando era joven, escuchaba música. When I was younger, I listened, or I used to listen, to music. Future tenses, we could use the near future. Mañana voy a escuchar música. So the verb ir plus an infinitive. We could use the simple future. Mañana escucharé música. Tomorrow I will listen to music. It doesn't matter which ones you use, as long as you use your present tense, one past, one future as a minimum, and then anything else is a bonus. For your second opinion, instead of using the same phrases, pienso que, en mi opinión, you could say something a bit more higher level, like diría que. I would say that, because that means you're then showing the examiner, hey, I can use the conditional tense as well. And you could talk about what someone else thinks about something. Según mi madre, according to my mum, you could say según mi amigo. And then finally, remembering to give your justifications, your reasons for what you think, what you feel about things. ¿Por qué? Because. Ya que. Since. So now I'm going to show you the mark scheme that examiners and your teacher will use to mark a 90-word question. So the question's worth 60 marks in total, and these marks are split into content and language, 10 marks for content and 6 marks for the quality of language. So as you can see, actually the content is more important than actually how good the Spanish that you use is, and that's why it's so important to do all 4 bullet points. All of the bullet points need to be covered, but not necessarily equally, so you could write 2 sentences on one, 3 sentences on another, that's not a problem. Anything irrelevant, so anything that's not relevant in any way to any bullet point, it will be ignored when marking for content, so it won't gain you anything for content, but it will be taken into account when marking quality of language. So the message there is don't go off topic, because you won't get any points for it, but you could lose points if you make mistakes in your language for that irrelevant content. Plus you'll lose time, which is valuable time that you'll need for the other sections of the paper. Looking at how the bullet points are of importance, missing even just one bullet point, it will cap your content marks. Even if everything you say about the other 3 is really, really good, it will still cap your marks. So to get anything above 7 out of 10, so to get 7, 8, 9 or 10 out of 10, you need to have all 4 bullet points. If you just mention 3, you accidentally miss one, or you don't mention it in a way that's clear enough to the examiner, it will limit you to a maximum of 6 marks. 2 bullet points will get you no more than 4 marks, and if you only mention one bullet point, you'll be capped at 1 to 2 marks. So hopefully that makes you realise how important it is to stick to the bullet points and be absolutely clear in your response that you're talking about those bullet points. In terms of opinions, not including enough opinions can also cap your mark. Even if you've mentioned all the bullet points, even if you've said really good stuff, really loads of detail, to get above 7, you need to have 2 opinions. Only including 1 opinion, it will limit you to between 3 and 6 marks. Even if it's great, you've got 3 tenses, you've mentioned all of the bullet points, if you just forget to give more than 1 opinion, you won't get any more than 6 out of 10 for content. And including no opinions whatsoever could limit you to 2 marks. And it's always a good idea to get into the habit of giving reasons for your opinions, and that's because it's essential in section 2. So it's best to just do it for both sections anyway, and then you're in the habit of doing it. Now, to give you a clearer idea of exactly what the examiner is looking at when they mark your work, other than the bullet points and the opinions, this is the criteria that is used to decide your content mark. So to get up into that top band, 9 out of 10 marks for content, or 10 out of 10 marks for content, you need a very good response that covers all aspects of the task, which you would do if you write a couple of sentences at least on all of the bullet points. Communication is clear, so that means you're getting your messages across, and a lot of information is conveyed. That's where if you just wrote one sentence about a bullet point, like when we looked at the pyramid, if you just said, I went to Spain with my family, that's not a lot of information. Whereas if you say it was great, it was fantastic, we went to the beach, I love to swim in the sea, next year I'm going to go back, that's a lot of information being conveyed. And then finally, opinions are expressed. So if you want to pause the video and have a read through that, please do, and if not, we'll have a look at the language criteria next. For marking your work in terms of your quality of language, which is a mark out of 6, this is the criteria that the examiner will refer to. So if we look at the top one, to get 5 or more marks out of 6, you need to use a variety of appropriate vocabulary. That means that whatever the GCSE topic is that is being brought up, let's say it is holidays, you're showing that you know lots and lots of words in that theme. So if it's about holidays and you say you go to Spain, if you talk about sunbathing, water sports, eating tapas, staying at a hotel, swimming in the sea, the more vocabulary you can use to demonstrate that you've got a really in-depth knowledge of that theme, the better. Complex structures and sentences are attempted. That means you've had a go at saying some more complex things, some extended sentences. Maybe you've had a go at saying something in the conditional tense. You don't need to get it perfectly correct, but actually just having a go demonstrates to the examiner that you're aiming high. You need to have your 3 tenses, your 3 time frames, which are largely successful, and that's where you can get things a little bit wrong, but your insurance policy is to use words like and phrases like next year, yesterday, last week, so that if you do get the grammar a bit wrong, you still get the message across. Your errors are mainly minor, but you can make some serious errors and still get into this top band, especially if those errors happen in more complex, more complicated sentences that you're attempting. The key thing is that the intended meaning is not always clear, but nearly always clear. So if you were to say these things to a native speaker, they'd get more or less what you're trying to say. And then finally, the style and register are appropriate. So if it's a blog, it reads like a blog. If it's a letter, it reads like a letter. Now let's take a look at section 2, which is the 150 word question. Again, you need to answer all aspects of the question, but this time there are only 2 bullet points. So you've got to write a lot more and you've got a lot less to guide you. So first I'd recommend, just as like with the 90 words, I recommend you have a look at the bullet points, work out what they mean, what they're asking you to say, what tenses you need to use to respond. And because this section has a lot more freedom, because you've got so much more to say with less bullet points, it's really easy to go off topic. So I recommend you make a plan. For example, you've got your 2 bullet points, you know you need to write roughly 75 words for each one. Plan. If it's about holidays, think, okay, it's asking me what did I do last year, but I've got 75 words. So I'm going to talk about what I did last year, who I did it with, how it was, make sure I give an opinion and a justification, and then I'm going to say next year I would like to do this, and I'm also going to go to such and such, so that I can show a range of tenses. So planning will help you to make sure you make the most of those 150 words to show off your knowledge of the Spanish language. And again, you need to ensure you refer to at least 3 time frames. And I'd say it's best to aim for 5 tenses. So maybe the present tense, the perfect or the preterite, the imperfect, and then a future or both futures, or a conditional tense. So try and get a good variety of tenses because again, it's showing the examiner that you know your stuff in Spanish. So let's jump straight in and have a look at the mark scheme for this one. This is a really big question because it's worth 32 marks, which is more than 50% of the whole paper. So getting this one right is really, really important. The marks are split not just into content and language, but into content, range of language and accuracy. It's 15 marks for content, which is more than half of the marks for the question, 12 marks for range of language, and then for this one there's also 5 marks for accuracy. So it is taken into a bit more, it's given a bit more importance in this one, how accurate you are with your verb conjugations and your adjective agreement and things like that. Again, only mentioning one bullet point caps you at 12 out of 15 for content, so make sure you mention both. And once again, anything irrelevant won't win you anything extra, but it could count against you for language and accuracy. Not justifying your opinions can also cap your mark for this one, the same as with the 90 word. So for this one, if you want to get between 10 and 15 marks out of 15 for content, you need 2 opinions, not just expressed, but also justified. So this is where it's crucial to make sure you're getting into the habit of giving an opinion, giving a reason. Pienso que, blah, 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 por qué, blah, blah, blah. Getting into that habit is crucial to doing well in this particular question. That's why I want you to get into that habit with the 90 word one as well, because it will do you loads of good in the 90 word one, it won't do you any harm, and for this one, it will take you up into the higher bands. If you give your 2 opinions but you forget to justify them, even just to justify one of them, you won't get any more than 9 marks out of 15 for content, and expressing one opinion will limit you between 4 and 6 marks. So the most you could get if you just give one opinion is 6 marks out of 15. No opinions would cap you at 3 marks, but I'm sure that's not going to happen. No one's going to give no opinions. So for content, the criteria looks really, really similar with just some subtle differences. So obviously it's worth 15 for content instead of 10 like the last one. An excellent response which is fully relevant and detailed, so it's always on topic, it's relevant to one or both of the bullet points. Detailed, that's where you're giving all those extra details like we looked at with the pyramid. You're conveying a lot of information. Communication is clear, and this time it's not almost always clear, but it's pretty much clear all the time. There's very little scope for confusion. So if you said all of this to a native speaker, they'd really understand what you're talking about, and opinions are both expressed and justified. Again, have a pause of the video and read through the other bands so that you're aware of the kind of scope between 0 marks and 15 marks. Now looking at the range of language criteria, to get between 10 or 11, 12 out of 12 marks, you need a very good variety of appropriate vocabulary and structures. More complex sentences are handled with confidence, so they're not just attempted, but they're handled with confidence, producing a fluent piece of coherent writing. So this is where, to get into the top band for this question, you really need to know your stuff and demonstrate that to the examiner. But obviously, if you were to get the top band for everything, you're looking at a grade 9. So have a pause of the video again and read through the other things, because you can still make a few mistakes on this one. For example, if we look at the 7 to 9 band, good variety again, more complex sentences are regularly attempted. So you've shown that you keep having a good go at them, and most of the time you get them right, but you still might get a couple of sentences wrong. You make a mess of the grammar, the verb conjugation, the tense. It doesn't matter, you can still get a really good grade on this one. So have a pause, have a read, and then we'll look at the accuracy criteria. So this is the criteria that examiners will look at for the accuracy mark, which is out of 5. So it's the mark that has the least weight for this one, but it's still important because sometimes, quite often actually people will just be 1 or 2 marks away from the next grade boundary. So every little every single mark you can pick up in this exam is really going to count. To get 5 out of 5, it needs to be accurate. There can still be a few errors, and especially in the more complex structures, when you've had a go at the higher level stuff, you might make a couple of errors. You can still get 5 out of 5 for this. The main thing is that the examiner gets the sense that you're secure in your knowledge of how to use verbs for different people in different tenses. If they get that impression, they might give you 5 out of 5 marks. To get 4 out of 5 marks, that's still a really, really good grade. It's generally accurate, minor errors, sometimes major errors, especially in more complex stuff, and your verbs and tense formations are nearly always correct. So making a couple of big mistakes, it might only knock you down from a 5 to a 4. Again, have a pause of this and have a read through, and then we'll go on and look at section 3. Okay, before we take a look at section 3, which is the final section of the exam, we're going to have another look at the fudge acronym, but this time some of my students helped me rework this into a more memorable, more advanced one, which is poop JFK. Hopefully that's a bit more memorable than fudge. So it's got a lot of the same aspects. It's got present tense, an opinion, a second opinion, a past tense, justifications, future tense, and this time we're going to add in conditional spelt with a K just because it works with JFK. So again, for our opinions, we can use these sorts of opinion phrases. The past tense, we can use different tenses, the perfect, the preterite, or even the imperfect tense. We can give our justifications, a couple of future tenses, and for the conditional, you can get the conditional in there just by using the opinion phrase, diría que, I would say that. But if you want to be more explicit in your use of the conditional tense, you could say, for example, on the holiday topic, me encantaría ir a Francia, a Jamaica, or anything else, me encantaría comer una pizza mañana. Using me encantaría with an infinitive is an easy way to make sure you get a conditional tense in there as well. Section 3, the final section of the exam, is a translation where you need to translate a passage of text, which is usually about 50 words long, into Spanish, and it's going to be based on one of the GCSE themes. Now for this question, the marks are split between conveying key messages, which means you're getting the message across, and your application of grammatical knowledge of language and structures, which is a really long-winded way of just saying you know your grammar and you know your vocab. To get the best marks, to get top marks, you need to translate every single part of the text, ensuring you've used the correct tenses, the correct verb endings, and the correct adjectival agreement. So if it's a masculine noun, you're using a masculine adjective, and so on. If you're not sure about parts of the translation and you just miss it, you skip that bit out, the examiner will have to consider that had you attempted it, you would have made major errors. So it's better to have a go and maybe make a couple of minor errors, because you still might get the message across, which will get you marks for conveying key messages, and then your errors might just knock you down a band on your application of grammatical knowledge. But if you didn't have a go at all, it would really take your grade down. So the message there is have a go at all of it. Let's take a look at the criteria that examiners will use for marking the key messages on your translations. To get 6 out of 6 on this one, you need to convey all key messages. And the way examiners will work out if you've done that is that on the mark scheme, the translation you do will be split up into 13 key messages, and each one of those is worth a tick. If you look at the total ticks and how they compare to marks, sometimes getting one extra tick can move you up a grade boundary, because, for example, if you get 8 ticks, 9 ticks, or 10 ticks, you'll get 4 out of 6 marks. So getting that 11th tick can take you up a grade boundary. Well, not a grade boundary, but it can take you up a mark on this particular question, which could be the difference between going up a grade boundary overall on your GCSE. What examiners do to work out if you get the message across is they ask themselves, would a native speaker get the message? So that means it doesn't need to be perfect Spanish, it doesn't need to have the right articles, el or la or los. You might get the adjective endings wrong, you might make spelling mistakes, but if a native speaker would understand it, you can still get 6 out of 6 on the conveying key messages part of the translation. And finally, this is the criteria that the examiners use for marking your application of grammatical knowledge of language and structures. So basically, this is where it is important that you get the verb endings right, that you have your accents, your spelling is correct, and things like that. To get 6 out of 6, your work could be virtually faultless. You could have a couple of missed accents, that's fine, you can still get 6 out of 6, but generally the examiner gets the impression that you know your vocabulary because you've managed to translate all the nouns really well, and you know your structures, you know your grammar because you've used the correct verb endings, the correct tenses, your adjectives match up, and all those different grammatical things. But again, to get a grade 9 at GCSE, you don't need to be in the top band for every single one of these marking criteria on every single section of the paper. You can get a 5 on this one, or even a 4, and get 5 on the last one, and get 30 out of 32 on the writing, and that would still give you a really good grade 9. And to get a grade 8 or a grade 7, still really, really good grades. You don't need to be aiming for that top band every time, but I think it's best to always aim high, and then if we do make any mistakes, we might only fall down a couple of bands. So pause the video and have a read through these just so you've got a better idea of what the examiner's looking at when they mark your translation in section 3. And that brings us to the end of this video. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it's been useful. Some next steps you might want to take. The first one is just to practice, practice, practice. Practice really does make perfect. You can practice these sorts of questions by asking your teacher for past papers or going onto the exam websites and looking for them yourself, and practicing all the different tenses that you might need to use, the opinion phrases. There is an art to writing really good exam responses. Part of that art is knowing what sorts of boxes you're trying to tick, and I hope that this video has helped you understand the other side of the process and what examiners are looking for in your work. Secondly, any grammar that you looked at in this video and you thought, actually, I don't feel that confident using the preterite tense, or I don't think I could use the conditional that confidently, go back and revise it, or ask your teacher for some help revising that particular tense. Anything you think from watching this that might let you down in the exam, any of those elements in the acronym that you feel less secure with, go away, you know what you need to work on, and practice, 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 and revise for that. Otra vez, muchísimas gracias por ver y espero que te vaya muy bien con el español.